this. I have to ask you, there's no easy way of talking about this. There is an issue about your own integrity when it came to some of the things that you have said about impact assessments. You told me that you were doing lots and lots of impact assessments, sectoral impact assessments, really, really important to work out what's going to happen after Brexit. Okay. And then you told the House of Commons something else. I'm going to play you two clips. The good news, they're both you. The first is earlier in the year.
We continue to analyse the impact of our exit across the breadth of the UK economy, covering more than 50 sectors, I think 58 at the last count, to shape our negotiating position.
Has the government undertaken any impact assessments on the implications of leaving the EU for different sectors of the
Not in sectors. There's no sort of systematic impact assessment.
So there isn't one, for example, on the automotive sector?
On the
automotive sector?
No, not I'm aware of, no.
Is there one on aerospace?
Not I'm aware of,
no. One on financial services?
Well, I think the answer is going to be no to all of them.
No to all of them.
No to all of them.
Right.
So did these impact assessments exist or not?
No, using the word impact doesn't make an impact assessment. Let me be clear.
But you used the word impact.
Yes, I use the word impact. Let me be clear. The impact assessment's got a proper meaning in almost in the law, certainly in civil service, and the Better Regulation Task Force has got a guideline on it. What we have done is analysed each sector and said, okay, how big is it? What employment? How much does it depend on European Union regulation? How much does it depend on European Union market? That's what we've been focusing on. Not trying to...
Wait
a minute. Well, in that case, there are 850 pages of that.
So you were wrong in the House of Commons. They do exist.
No. There's a distinction, because what the people who are asking for this were sort of aiming at was the idea of a sort of forecast of the impact. You know, the forecast of how much would this industry lose under this scenario or that scenario. Those don't exist.
But that's the kind of thing that people out there would hope the government had done. I mean, you're going into this really important negotiation. People want to know what the government's view of the effect on the car industry or the aircraft industry or whatever might be.
We know what the effective regulatory barriers are. That's the important thing. Do we have to deal with that? We're going to come, no doubt, later to the arguments of convergence and so on. And how do we deal with that? And what do we need to negotiate? Now, when we started this out, we were looking possibly at doing a sector-by-sector negotiation. We're not going to do that, in fact. So there's no point in doing one forecast here, one forecast there. We don't do that. And those forecasts, and those forecasts don't work. I mean, if you look at what people have forecast for the outcome of the Brexit referendum, the Treasury, the Bank of England, all said the market would go down, all said the economy would go down. Okay. What's happened? What's happened? It's actually improved. We've got the best employment we've had in this country ever, lowest unemployment in my lifetime.
We're going way off topic. Do you not accept that you gave the impression that these detailed impact assessments were being done, had been done? They were eye-wateringly detailed, they were meticulous, they existed as a quote...
Sectoral analysis is not the same as an impact assessment.
Okay. Here you are talking to the House of Lords Committee just in October. We are conducting a broad range of analysis on the macroeconomic and sectoral level to, quote, understand the impact of leaving the EU on all aspects of the UK, including the agriculture. That is an impact sectoral assessment of the kind you then said didn't exist.
If that's what you're describing, that's what they've got. But what they've got is 850 pages of sectoral analysis, right? That is the size, the employment, the dependence on Europe, the availability of other markets. Now, that's the data. That's there. That's done. Nobody's ever said anything different. And throughout the course of the last 18 months, sectoral analysis is the phrase I've used. What we're getting into is almost an Alice in Wonderland. Actually, no. More Gulliver. Gulliver's Travels.
Do you not think you were loose in your language, at least?
I've answered questions on this probably over 1,000 times. And I've used sectoral analysis 999 times out of 1,000.
OK, let's turn to another big issue, which is money. How much is it going to cost us, very roughly, to leave the EU?
Well, Treasury's estimate is something like 35, 39 billion, but it's very complex. There are lots of plays in it, you know.
I gave you that figure not that long ago, and you rolled your eyes and you shook your head and you laughed and you said, no, absolutely not. That's just a guess. Well, if 40 billion was a guess, it was a bloody good guess.
If you want to be precise about what I said, and you want precision, I said that sounds sort of made up.
Sort of made up, but it was pretty accurate, wasn't it?
And the reason it was sort of made up was because we were at that stage going through the line-by-line analysis. Nobody at that point knew what the outcome would be. We were going through line by line. And you said it earlier.
When did you know?
Oh, well, I mean, actually about a week or so ago. I mean, it was quite recently, because we didn't complete the line-by-line analysis until we went into the final round of negotiation.
It's an awful lot of money. Can you point to one occasion on which a government minister ever warned the British public that this is what it was going to cost to leave the EU?
Well, I think what you can say is from the beginning, in the Lancaster House speech, and indeed actually, I think maybe even in her conference speech, but certainly the Lancaster House speech, the Prime Minister said, we will meet our international obligations.
But no one knew what that meant.
Well, because we hadn't calculated the numbers. We hadn't seen their bid. I mean, the opening bid was 100 billion plus. You know, we saw that on the front page of the Financial Times. Sources in Brussels say 100 billion. It's nothing like 100 billion.
But it's a lot more than nothing either.
Yeah, of course it's not nothing. I mean, you just had, wait a minute, you've just had Keir Starmer on here promising effectively that a Labour government will continue paying large sums of money. We're not going to do that. That's the promise we did make.
Can I just ask you about the money, the sums, because people get very confused. So 40 billion is roughly 4 years of net inputs at the moment. So for 4 years, as it were, we've got 4 years of payments.
It won't quite work like that.
It won't quite work like that.
No.
But at what point in this Parliament do we start to get money back? Or do you think it won't happen in a serious way, this Parliament? Hardly any will come back this Parliament.
What will happen, the way it will play, is the first, if we have a 2-year transition period, which is the next piece of negotiation, that'll probably carry on pretty much as now. So you might guess 20 billion, but it is a guess. We don't know
during those 2 years.
Because 2 years. Then we'll be out, and then the rest will be probably in a long tail. But we haven't actually done the profile yet of that. You know, but it'll be a long tail. Maybe go on for many, many years, but quite small sums.
Okay, let's move on to this year's, this week's negotiation. It feels like a year. Feels like a year. But this week's negotiation. Now, the crucial question is whether that full convergence quote in paragraph 49.
Well, it's not full convergence.
Full alignment, beg your pardon, in paragraph 49 about the Irish border.
With respect, Andrew, it's very important. That's a very important distinction.
But,
right?
okay, I've made
no, it's a very important distinction. You were berating me earlier about using words.
Okay.
The very important.
I've corrected myself. Full alignment.
Full alignment, and it was changed from no divergence. That's the point. And the difference is,
what does full alignment mean?
Let me just explain. No divergence would have meant actually taking cut and paste rules, right? Full alignment means, it covers about a number of areas, about 4 important ones: agriculture, road and rail,
tourism,
water.
transport.
Well, it's unlikely to have much impact on health or indeed on education, which are 2 of the sectors in there. But the ones it does have impact on, we're not looking to create a circumstance where animal welfare is worse in Britain than elsewhere. We're not looking to create a circumstance where safety of food is worse, or indeed pollutions of waterways. So we will meet the outcomes. We'll meet the outcomes, but not do it by just copying or doing what the European Union does.
Put it in simple terms.
And to put it plainly to you, because Keir was reading out the union comments on it, when that same point was put to Michel Barnier on Friday, he said, no, you don't understand. This does not mean membership of the single market or indeed membership of the customs union.
I don't think it does mean membership of either of those things. But if I put it in very, very simple terms, if they have a rule on carrots, then in due course our rules on carrots will be aligned to their rules on carrots. Their carrots and our carrots will be, broadly speaking, the same carrots.
Not necessarily. we're full alignment.
Really?
Full alignment means outcomes. It means, let's say...
If I align 2 cars, they're next to each other.
Well, Northern Ireland is next to the Republic of Ireland.
And it will have next to regulations. It'll be very similar.
There will be some similarities. Again, the Prime Minister laid this out in her Florence speech. She said there are areas where we will want similar outcomes, and we'll have similar methods to achieve them. There'll be areas where we have similar outcomes, we'll have different methods to achieve them. That's going to be true of a lot of product areas, a lot of manufacturing and so on. And there'll be areas where we want different outcomes and use different methods.
Well, let's stick with what we know, which is in this agreement that you've all signed and signed up to, full alignment, does involve agriculture. David Jones, who was your junior minister, is very, very worried about this because he points out quite rightly that if we're going to do a big free trade deal with America, for instance, they really want agriculture to be part of that. They have insisted that we have to have agricultural regulations and norms that apply to them as well. And we can't be in both. We can't be both inside the EU.
You say that. We haven't yet started that negotiation, so it's a bit hard. There's an awful lot here. We see it actually in some of your earlier comments as well, both to 2 of your interviewees. of sort of assuming that what the other side says in the negotiation at the beginning is the outcome. It isn't necessarily so. And you can see an example of that this week in the Japan agreement, where there are agricultural dimensions to it. And there's no way that Europe and Japan are going to be on the same agricultural basis.
All right, but nonetheless, the US Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, a very important man in the Trump administration, has said that any deal with Brussels to maintain its regulations might hinder development of a closer post-Brexit UK-US relationship. And it was essential that we remove any unnecessary regulatory divergences with the US. Now, that seems to go against the spirit of what you have agreed looking at Dublin this week.
Well, he said maintain their regulations. That's not what we're going to do. We're going to bring back control. That's the phrase used. And the House of Commons will decide.
But you're going to be aligned. You're going to be aligned, fully aligned, in fact.
If you look at any free trade deal, anywhere in the world, and the easiest one to look at is the Canadian one with Europe. If you look at any free trade deal, what you see is agreements on where product standards normally comply. That's what it comes down to. Sometimes you see other things. In the free trade deal between Europe and Canada, they say on labour standards, they will not go below the ILO, the International Labour Organization minimum. So those are always a part of that. And what the House of Commons and what the House of Lords, what Parliament will decide in the future is what's actually good for this industry, but what's good both in terms of the market in Europe, the market in the rest of the world. They'll make those decisions independently with full sovereignty and in the light of what the consequences will be.
We have promised full alignment on a whole range of things because of the Irish border issue. Yeah. The Chancellor of the Exchequer has said that under virtually all circumstances...
But it's a small range of things, it's not a whole range of things.
But it's quite a big range of things. Yeah. The Chancellor of the Exchequer said that under all circumstances we will pay the money to the EU. Can I ask you whether this agreement this week is actually real?
No, it is conditional on an outcome. I'm afraid that wasn't quite right. I mean, it is conditional. It's conditional on getting an implementation period and conditional on a trade outcome.
Let me put this very bluntly.
Before I finish that, now I left something out there. I said the trade outcome, but also the other elements of the treaty will strike with them, which will be security, foreign affairs, counter-terrorism.
Things. Okay. Yeah. So in the unhappy possibility, but it's a possibility that we get onto the trade side of the negotiations, phase 2, and the EU really take us to pieces on that. They don't give us what we want. They're not at all helpful when it comes to the city or commerce generally, and they really have us over a barrel, and we hate it. And we say we're not having any of that. In those circumstances, are we committed to the regulatory convergence? Are we committed to paying the money?
Well, no deal is no deal. Now, wait a minute, let me finish. You want the answer. Okay. Otherwise, you'll be coming back to me later saying, you only said this, didn't say the second half. So, number one, no deal means that we won't be paying the money. Some of these areas...
Okay, the Chancellor is wrong about that.
It's been made clear by number 10 already, so that's not actually new. The second element about this is the other areas. Now look, one of the things we have had as a major objective, a major negotiating objective for the British government, and we don't normally lay our red lines out in public, that's one of the things I've always said, is we want to protect the peace process, and we also want to protect Ireland from the impact of Brexit for them. So we were, this was a statement of intent more than anything else. It was much more a statement of intent than it was a legally enforceable thing.
Here is the crucial question. That promise on full alignment that we have made not just to the EU, but also in specific terms to the Irish government, to Dublin. If we don't get a deal, does that promise get torn up?
Well, I think if we don't get a deal, we're going to have to find a way of making sure we keep the open, keep the frictionless border, as it were, an invisible border, in Northern Ireland. We do it at the moment. Understand something. At the moment, there are different tax and levy regimes and excise regimes north and south of the border. We manage that without having border posts allotted along the 300 rows there. And we'll find a way of doing that too.
The Taoiseach thinks that he has got that full alignment in his back pocket. That is an absolutely firm promise from Theresa May and yourself and the British government. He may be watching this. Can you look in the camera and say that we absolutely commit ourselves to that?
What we say is we commit ourselves to maintaining a frictionless, invisible border. That's what we undertake.
Even with no deal.
Even with no deal, even with a WTO deal, we'll find.
How? Because that is a border between the EU and us.
I strongly recommend reading our paper that we published. And we published 14 papers this year, this summer.
Just tell people, is it a technical solution?
Well, there'll be technical solutions. There'll be solutions using things like trusted traders. So big companies would actually cross the border without any check, but they'd notify and there'd be audits of them.
Okay.
There'll be issues like electronic pre-notification. There'll be all sorts of things, and also large allowances for small companies. There are a whole series of possibilities that we can do, which nobody's engaged on yet. We need to engage for the next stage to get that right.
Transitional period about 2 years.
About 2 years, yeah.
Is it going to be the case that during that transitional period we are still negotiating or not?
No, we would expect, well, there might be some minor negotiations going on, but we'd expect the substantive trade deal to be struck. Not signed, because we've got to be technically outside immediately afterwards. But we expect
there could be tinkering going on.
Right. There'll be maybe tinkering, but the substantive deal must be struck.
So in real terms, we now, because there has to be an implementation phase and all that, we have about 8 months to do an incredibly complicated trade deal that took Canada 7 years. Are you really convinced it can all be done in 8 months?
It's not that complicated. It comes right back to the alignment point. The first thing is we want an overarching free trade deal, which has no tariffs. All right, so you don't have to negotiate every tariff line, which takes a long time. Secondly, we start in full alignment. We start in complete convergence.
So
with
it can
the
be done
EU, and so we then work it out from there.
Let me push back one more time on this, because this comes to the kind of arrangement we want to have once we have finally left the EU, which the Cabinet is finally going to discuss before Christmas. Can I ask you what your vision of that is?
Well, I mean, it's not just my vision. It's what actually has been discussed in Cabinet already, before the Lancaster House speech, before the Florence speech, before the White Paper that was published, which is an overarching free trade deal, but including services, which Canada doesn't, with individual specific arrangements for aviation, for nuclear, for data, a whole series of strands which we've worked out too. Most of them based on where we start now. And then the thing, as Michel Barnier himself has said, the thing is how we manage divergence. That's the point. How we manage divergence so it doesn't undercut the access to the market.
Going further forward.
And we can do that, but Parliament will control that.
If the basic deal, I'm being very crude about this, but is Canada plus the city or something like
Canada
that?
plus as well, probably
Plus.
would be one way of putting it.
But the pluses are difficult, aren't they? Because, for instance, the French want to steal as much of the city as they possibly can. So the fact that they can...
I wouldn't use that word. That's your word.
That's my word. It's possible, appropriate, grab, whatever, as much of the city as they possibly can. Now, it's perfectly possible that that will make a very difficult negotiation and that cannot be done within 8 months. So if it's not finished within 8 months, what happens?
I don't agree. I mean, it's more like a year than 8 months in truth. Because bear in mind, we can't sign this until after March, until after we actually leave. Maybe 1 minute after we leave, or 1 second after we leave, but the formal technicalities, we can't do that. But we've got about a year, and that was actually why this week was important. That's because if we got, no, let me finish the point. If we had gone through this week...
I've got another this week question.
All right, then, and come back into March, then we really would have been compressed, and I would then be sitting here agreeing with you saying it's difficult to do. So the odds, as it were, against a WTO or no deal outcome have dropped dramatically.
That's the meaning of this week.
That's right.
Let me ask you what Michael Gove meant when he said that this can all be looked at again at the next general election. If we don't like the deal that David Davis has struck, don't worry, we can go to the voters and strike. That wasn't very helpful, was it?
Well, it's a sort of statement of the obvious that any new government is elected on a mandate of its own. Now, we would be re-elected, I would hope, on the mandate of the deal we've delivered. Any other government might not be, and that's a function of democracy. Of course, that would mean there'll be consequences. You'd have to go back and renegotiate something, whatever. But it's a statement of the obvious. It's a statement of the fact that in Britain, Parliament is sovereign, or at least it will be once we get back to the situation we're negotiating.
And what you want is Canada plus.
You're desperately trying to get a headline out of this. What we want is a bespoke outcome. We'll probably start with the best of Canada and the best of Japan and the best of South Korea, and then add to that the bits that's missing, which is the services.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. That's all we've got time for. Next